I'm Karen Thompson. I'm the director of the Consortium for Gender, Sexuality, Race, and Public Culture and the chair of Gender and Sexuality Studies. And I'm really delighted to welcome you to an event conversation featuring only our second Consortium public scholar in residence, Professor Moya Bailey from Northwestern University. For those of you who don't know what the Consortium is is appended to the Gender and Sexuality Studies Department. It's a Mellon-funded project on intersectional studies, but one of our main goals and efforts is to translate our research for public culture, for public consumption, to also work on the objects of contemporary and everyday life, and to distribute that work, and to also partner with activists and community organizations in ways that are not extractive, but that are there to sort of enhance and kind of redistribute the resources that we are given to benefit the community. And so I think that there's no better person to bring in to the consortium than someone who has done all of those things at the highest of levels and the most profound of levels, Professor Moya Bailey from Northwestern University. Professor Bailey is an associate professor and the founder of the Digital Apothecary, as well as co-founder of the Black Feminist Health Science Studies Collective. Her work focuses on marginalized groups' use of digital media to promote social justice, and she's interested in how race, gender, and sexuality are represented in media and medicine. She's the digital alchemist, which I'd love to hear more about what that means, for the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network, and the board president of the Allied Media Projects, a Detroit-based movement media organization that supports an ever-growing network of activists and organizers. She's a co-author of #Activism, Networks of Race and Gender Justice with MIT, and the author of the topic of our conversation today, Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance. In conversation with Professor Bailey is our very own Consortium NGSS faculty member and a rising star in her field, Professor A.E. Stevenson. She's assistant professor of gender and sexuality studies here at USC and received her PhD in cinema and media studies from UCLA in the Department of Film, TV, and Digital Media. Born and raised in DeSoto, Texas forever, she received her bachelor's degree in art history from the University of Chicago. And she's currently working on an incredible book project on Black social life and how Black women and girls have fundamentally changed the visual language of the internet in analyses of Vine, TikTok, Instagram's The Shade Room, and the music videos of Solange. Stevenson has published in Feminist Media Histories on Chaos Hair and Sanaa Hamri's Something New, as well as in Catalyst, a review essay on Becoming Human, Matter, Meaning in an Anti-Black World by another of our GSS faculty members, Zakiya Imam Jackson. And before the event begins officially, I also want to extend our thanks to the hard-working staff of Gender and Sexuality Studies, as well as of the Consortium for Gender, Sexuality, Race, and Public Culture, specifically Artemisa Clark and Elliot Dunn, without whom none of this could ever happen. So please extend a thank you and also a warm welcome to our speakers today. Professor Moya Bailey.
Hi, I'm so excited. I see a couple of my students here, which is so nice. All right, so I first want to thank you for your work. It has really been, this book coming out right before I was really finishing the dissertation was super helpful because I feel like I had a lot of questions directed towards me about methodology. How do you prove certain things, right? When it's a question of violence, especially online, and even off, as we are seeing right now with some of the unfolding things with the conversation around Jonathan Majors, the question of proof and evidence kind of is very triggering for those who are in Black studies in terms of like the reliance on the archive to demonstrate a truth of Black life or a truth of Black death. So I kind of want to know, like, for my own interest, like, how did you come across your methods I think that I know a couple of the tools that she used. In chapter 1 specifically used Voyant. I literally kind of just followed like your exact model. I was looking at comments on the Shade Room. So I just want to know how you came to approach your methods in the book.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm so excited to be here and just want to start with thank you to Karen for the invitation and thanks to everyone for showing up. My methods are really about how to impact people with as little harm as possible. I really think that my methods are a harm reduction practice. And as somebody who saw the way that a lot of academic research was done, especially with people who were engaged with social media, I wanted to be careful about how I interacted with folks and kind of what the conversations were that I was having. So from the very beginning, I made sure that I was studying a community that I felt connected to. So there was a different level of accountability. I know there is this idea in the academy that you should study the other, that makes it quote unquote more objective. And that never has set right with me. So definitely feeling like autoethnography in the work of like Black women, anthropologists and sociologists sort of undergirds my thinking there about wanting to connect to a community. And that then shaped how I interacted with them. So the methods I chose were methods that to me felt less intrusive and methods that aligned a bit with what people were already producing. So one of the practices from the book, #activism, that I also employed in this book was for every, Twitter handle that I used, I made sure to reach out to the Twitter handle and say, this is something that will be in the manuscript. Do you want your handle attributed or not? And then giving people a first look at what I had written for the latter chapters where I actually have interviews. So people can say this I did or didn't catch the essence of what it is that they were talking about. So those were some of the practices. In terms of tools though, Voyant was exciting to me because it's also open source, anyone can access it. And that to me, I'm excited to hear that it was a useful method for you, and that ability to replicate or create a path where someone else can follow is really important too, so that even the practices of the research aren't limited or blocked by a paywall.
Yeah. I took a class with Jonah and Drucker, actually, at UCLA, and Chris, it's evading me, it'll come to me, these digital humanities classes, and we use Voyant there. And what I learned from using Voyant is it's very interesting when Voyant meets like AAVE, like the words that do appear are, it's like an A or like a letters, like as opposed to like actual words or even phrases. So I found that really interesting as like a demonstration of the issues therein within digital humanities, like how these tools can literally not capture, for the good and for the bad, the way we communicate with each other. Totally,
and that again reminds me why a multi-method approach is so needed, right? It can only get you so far.
Thank you. That's so true. Yeah. I feel like I had to fight for my life to tell people that. So thank you for mentioning #activism. One of my questions I wanted to ask is, how did this book emerge out of that work that you were doing with Sarah Jackson, Brooke Foucault-Wells, and Jeannie Laurie?
Yeah, so that book really is the catalyst for this one. If you're in the academy and you are an assistant professor, there's definitely a sense that you should not do a co-authored book, you should focus on your manuscript for tenure, your single author manuscript. But honestly, I was a bit intimidated about writing a single authored manuscript, and I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be. And my dissertation is super narrow and niche, so it didn't really make sense as a book project. But working on hashtag activism, I was looking at these tweets that Janet Mock had created related to the hashtag Girls Like Us, and I just got the way that misogynoir was showing up, and even how people were talking about misogynoir made me want to make a bigger claim in terms of what I meant when I said misogynoir. There was a moment where I felt like the word was being used and people just assumed that I was talking about cis straight Black women. Mm-hmm. And so part of the book was to say that's not who I'm talking about exclusively, although definitely major population that experiences misogynoir, but there are other people there too. And a lot of those other folks are really part and partial to transforming misogynoir as it exists online and in digital space. Mm-hmm. So that really became part of the reason that this book came to exist, was having the confidence that I gained through co-authoring with two scholars who were more senior than me. That kind of gave me, I can write a book. Mm-hmm. That it gave me permission in a way. And also I feel like that is what led me to my field in communications. I definitely saw myself as a women's studies, like undergrad, grad. So I definitely thought that was my trajectory. But writing that book opened me up to communications, and then made the Digital Apothecary possible, and made the questions that I'm asking in the humanities come alive in a new way. So I'm really grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in, I'm currently teaching Intro to Gender and Sexuality Studies. This is my first time teaching it. And I come from now I'm involved in a third kind of like field of study. Started in art history, did cinema and media studies, and now I'm teaching gender studies. And what I find really interesting about your text is that what I find really interesting about the text, and also about I'm assigning this in a few weeks, the intro and the first chapter, is how important it is in this current moment to think about digital platforms as an extension or a continuation of this type of wave within feminist studies. If we're, adhering to the wave system, which obviously has many issues, we could be in a third or fourth wave right now, and the fourth wave is really dedicated to organizing online. In that same sense, I'm kind of wondering, coming out of all these different areas of study, I guess I wonder, does this inform your kind of title as alchemist? When I think about alchemy, I think about I immediately kind of go to the metaphysical almost, and thinking about not to get too woo-woo.
No, let's go there. You see my witch here?
I was literally, that's why I was like, okay, so I'm kind of like Karen mentioned, I'm curious about your title as digital alchemist, and how does that inform your approach to care, harm reduction, and also Black women's health?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I really identify as a gatherer and a person who brings people together, and I think I do that with ideas too. And one of the ways that I saw myself earlier when I was interested in going to medical school was the healing aspect and the care aspect, which I feel has very much divorced from the way medicine is practiced in this country currently. And alchemy, to me, sort of gets back to that a little bit. It's the esoteric, this mythical thing of turning metals into gold. That bit of magic feels very much connected to the ethereal, the way I think of health and care as these intangible things that help make our world the world we want to live in. And my friend Yolo Akili, who runs Being, Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, was a former roommate and very much into astrology when I was in grad school. And so I'm also like super into astrology, witchy things. So that became, I don't know, it's like always in the background there. And so that's how I started to think about digital alchemy, marrying this esoteric, ancient sort of thing of alchemy with the digital and what we're doing now, and the way that people take something that wasn't intended for a particular purpose and use it in a new way. And the digital apothecary is that too. So this old idea of what we think of as medicine, and connecting that to the digital. It's like this past, present, future all rolled into one. And that sense of time that's nonlinear is really exciting to me. I really got a lot from in Jackie Alexander's Pedagogies of Crossing and her notion of palimpsestic time. And so that palimpsest of, the writing that's sort of bleeding through and informing the present is very much how I think of apothecary and alchemy, these things that come from the past but inform the future.
Wow. Okay, before we continue, now I have to do it. So, as you see here, I have my Gemini necklace on. So, what's your big three?
I am a Gemini.
No. May or June?
June.
Okay, I'm a May Gemini.
Okay.
May 31st. Okay.
Lovely.
What's your...
I am a Pisces moon with a Libra
big
rising.
feelings. Ooh. Okay.
Please.
Gemini sun and rising, Libra moon.
Oh, look at all that air.
All air.
Yes, you're in the right profession.
Exactly. Like, and my Mercury is also in Gemini. I had no other chance, I had no other option but to do what I do. Okay, back on track. We will be returning to this at dinner. I was really moved by your continued acknowledgement of like Black queer etymology and like all of these terms that you use. The first chapter is Misogynoir as a drag, and then I'm thinking also obviously of chapter 2 where you're looking at Janet Mock, Cece McDonald's organizing. But all the chapters have some sort of connection back to this kind of Black queer community. And I really wanted to hear more about, I know you're coming out of gender studies, but women's studies, gender studies, and I'm thinking about, in the process of publishing this book and like having it read by people of all different fields, was there a pushback or a call to do more of that, pushback against you doing it, or either direction? Because I think that, within certain communities, within Black studies, like a kind of acknowledgement of the contributions that Black queer people have made is still kind of like, it can just be skipped over and still be considered like, a very rigorous project. So I wanted to know, how did you come to this continue returning? Yeah.
So one of the things I'm very fortunate to have done is gone to Spelman College. So like my Black studies was always feminist. I don't know a Black studies that centers men. Like even I was a little reluctant to read Du Bois, honestly, because because we learn about, you know, the letters
things.
he's writing to, you know, Anna Julia Cooper, or like that there are these Black women who are informing his scholarship. So that to me was, I was like,
There's beef. There's beef.
exactly. So I think I started Black Studies with already the feminist critique of Black Studies. And then even with feminism, also because I learned a lot of my feminist theory from Beverly Guy-Sheftall at Spelman, I never felt like feminism wasn't mine. Like even saying Black feminism is new for me, because feminism for me was always Black. So that has definitely shaped, I think, how I approach. And so I don't think I had any hesitancy in terms of how I framed it. One thing that didn't happen with this book, but has happened with journal articles sometimes is, you know, I capitalize the B in Black and keep the W in white lowercase, just to acknowledge like the way that Black is a political category and that whiteness to me still is not. And that's the kind of editorial pushback that I've gotten, but not with this.
Okay. Yeah, I am curious, obviously, like I'm getting started. Sorry. I'm like turning my dissertation into a book. I'm like, what is that? And so I'm just trying to, you know, think about, I was super curious about the processes that people experience and the feedback that people get when they do projects that are very multidisciplinary, and people interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and people are only entering in for one discipline. And, you know, the pushback that we get oftentimes is like a process of this disciplining of the discipline in a very Foucauldian way. And so I guess, you know, it's really interesting to me. It's glad I have all these questions and just jumped around. When you said feminism was always Black for you, you know, I come from like a matriarchal family, but no one there was talking about feminism. I'm the first to leave home to get an education. My other family member who has a degree before me is in education. And so, you know, this kind of conversation about feminism and like the histories of it and how it specifically comes out of this kind of moment in the South, for some is something that I was really shocked to kind of learn, you know, when I was in undergrad. But I think what I learned about feminism comes from Black women and femmes on Tumblr. I created my first Tumblr in 2013 when I studied abroad in Paris, as a way for me to like have all these pictures that my family could see. And I just started finding all these people who were talking about all these things, like all these artists and all these musicians. And so I was really moved by your first sentence, like in your chapter on Tumblr, being like, I wasn't going to talk about Tumblr at all. And that was very, very something that I felt in my own dissertation process. I literally can't even think about how to begin discussing Tumblr. But my question I have here is, why do you think Tumblr evades a lot of critical investigation, given how many people now are in this mainstream like image production from Tumblr? I'm thinking about the Art Hook Collective, Amanda Steinberg, Frida Cashflow, who is now a really big model, thinking about How to Be a Fucking Lady, Rashida, White Girls Ain't Shit, Rim de la Rim, all these people who were in community on Tumblr. And yet, unless you were there at that particular moment, you don't know who they are.
Unless you were there.
For that moment.
I mean, that's it. I feel like that's why it's hard to talk about Tumblr, because there was this moment where Tumblr was like magic.
Yeah.
Like it was such a wonderful place to be, and unfortunately it doesn't exist that way because these platforms get bought and there are new corporate interests that are shaping the direction that the platforms go. So it's not what it was. I do hear that there's like a Tumblr resurgence happening.
There is.
But yeah, the way that people were able to connect on the platform is just not the same. And for people to get into Tumblr, it's still, I think, it's not an easy social media platform to learn. So I think that's also probably why it's not studied as much, because it's a little confusing, and especially in those early days. I mean, the platform itself was cumbersome, so the moment for studying it and folks who are interested, I think is very niche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, you know, when we think about like social media and network, like studying it, there's like especially for, I would say maybe I'll speak for like on my part, especially for me as a Black person, like I don't want to tell everybody our business. Like, I don't want everybody knowing who's who or what, you know, all the time. And it's very difficult because I do sometimes see how certain things that happened before are connecting to this very current moment that would require this kind of like, as you're saying, like palimpsestic kind of process. And I wonder how, if you had that same kind of urge to hide or cover, and if that kind of drove your objects of study throughout.
Yes, yeah. So there are certain things that I'm curious about that just won't be in a book because I don't think they're for everyone. And I do think that social media has made things public in a way that creates a false sense of intimacy. I mean, people talk about that parasocial thing. This moment is interesting to me because I think about a lot of, you know, things that were in Black culture and how things move at a different pace. So you might remember when the Obamas like first did their like fist bump, and people were calling it a terrorist fist jab, you know, like that happened because people were like, what is this? But now we have like the shift from that not knowing to being a part of public culture is so much faster because of social media. So the things that are in community are now accessible to a larger group, and sometimes I don't know that that's helpful. Sometimes I don't know that actually creates more understanding. So yeah, I'm curious about that, and I try to be mindful of what I'm bringing forth. And so a lot of everything that I talk about is public, right? So the Tumblrs, the two people whose Tumblrs I talk about, those were public Tumblrs. You didn't have to have a password to access them. And also they're defunct now. Like all of this required a level of vulnerability and people choosing to have their story put out there, and that being where I drew from for the text.
Okay.
We can also open to.
Yeah, I was wondering. I have a couple more questions, but we also could open up. I don't know what the timing is.
You could ask you a couple more.
Okay. So again, thinking about like kind of digital humanities in this text, I really enjoyed your content analysis throughout. Like I enjoy people who do media analysis and like actually like know what they're doing. And you know, I was really drawn to your text, I think like kind of on the heels, obviously, of the work of Sophia Noble, who was supposed to be here, but I'm sure she's just super busy. I invited her, like, oh my God. Sophia Noble and Andre Brock. And Andre Brock's book, Distributed Blackness, I think about how both he and Sophia kind of focus on this libidinal economy, this political economy of the internet that drives the interactions between outside Black groups and then intra-Black groups. And I wonder if you found in your process of content analysis that this sort of like economic view falls out or just holds as the foundation for the content analysis.
Yeah, so What's interesting is that a lot of the projects that I was thinking about were, at least initially, not behind a paywall. So it was like really thinking, if we're thinking about like the economy, that they wanted to be accessible to people who were in the communities that they care about. And so before these things were taken off of YouTube, you know, they had like millions of views. And that's pretty impressive for small scale, you know, not very well produced in lots of cases, you know, projects. And I was just struck by the fact that community wants to see themselves. Like, people want to see Black queer representation, and they want to see representations of themselves that don't conform to a limiting view of who people are. Like, show people in their full messy selves. And that became a real incentive. And I think what ended up happening for a lot of the productions was trying to hold that. Like, it's a moment where you can, there's a unique moment in time when your friends are in their 20-somethings and they're like, yes, we'll be in this, you know, free project for you with our cameras, and we'll figure it out. But to do the scale of production that, you know, shifts things into another level. But it's still happening. And I think that really speaks to a desire that's beyond what can be compensated, that there's an appeal. I think about this, like, people talk about markets and how it drives things, but so much of what I'm interested in is stuff people make for free. And I also think about, I was in Dr. Blaine's class earlier, and I mentioned a little bit about fan fiction and like how, for example, with Wakanda Forever, and people rewriting, you know, people writing about Riri and Shuri having a queer connection, like that to me is very much about what is it that people want to see, and also what are the little carrots that are there that can grow into something more. I'm really impressed by people's desire to do that. Like, people still want to do things because they want that story and aren't always driven by the market.
Yeah, I think about a lot of fan studies. Like, I think Tiziana Terranova's piece on fan labor is like something that really, you know, is interesting. And I think a lot of people see their interactions right now still somehow online as being like just for the fun of it, but actually, literally, especially the kind of markets that they're appearing on, platforms they're appearing on, it's all part of this business system that is very far away from the kind of fan work one could do online, you know, prior to the kind of like corporatization of the internet space. And so people are wanting to reach out to communities, like, you know, how can you find people in your area who are into Harry and Draco fanfic? You know, unless you get on, online. You know, you're not gonna put signs up. You know, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So I guess I get stop my questions there. I wanted to know if you had any questions for me. I know you haven't had any access to my work because I could have said it to you and I didn't. But if you had a question for me before we open up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about how it's been for you as somebody who, you know, has access to these, like, when you were writing your dissertation, did you get pushback for wanting to study what you study? And how, yeah, like how, I'm hoping things have shifted a little bit.
Yes and no, in the sense that I was in the digital media program. Nice. So, like, you know, it's traditional film. It's like in the School of Theater, Film, and Television. So, like, theater's over here, production's over here, critical studies is over here. And, you know, I think I was I think I'm like one of the, there was one person before me who does fan culture specifically. But I was one of the very few people who was doing like Black online stuff. And I think, Sophia came and gave a lecture on her book, like I think the month before it came out. And people were like, oh yeah, like I didn't know like that you could do that. I was like, yeah, I've been trying to tell y'all, And so it was really helpful as a lot of the people who I was looking towards, like hearing speak, their books weren't out yet. So like Sophia's book was out, but I wasn't doing platform studies like that. I wasn't doing Google. And then I was kind of like waiting for Andre Bach's book to come out. And then Andre's book came out and I was like, that's still not it, It's kind of like I was plucking from all over the place. And like the kind of consistent pushback I got from people who are more traditionally disciplined in certain fields is evidence and proof. And my thing is, I just really don't believe in that. In a certain sense, right? Like, when I'm teaching in class, I'm like, make sure your argument is backed up with those sources, But for some of this, like if I'm talking about harm on the Shade Room, and I'm talking about Zaya Wade and Megan Thee Stallion, there's no question that these people are being harmed by conversations that are being held on Shade Room, and that's informing how people are receiving them, that's informing how people are treating other people in their lives who fall within certain identifications, whether that be as a trans child, whether that be as a Black woman who is too tall. Right. And, it was difficult to figure out a way to prove what I was trying to say. And that's what was so interesting with the voyant. It's like I did all this like grabbing all these posts from the Shade Room. They post like 60 a day, 60 to 80 a day. So I had to go years back, to capture some of this. And then I put it in voyant, and it was like the highest words were like bitch and maybe something, They weren't demonstrating what I was trying to prove. And so I ended up doing the voyant process and then being like, see what I mean? That's like in the chart, it's like literally, that's what I mean. So I was like, now we're just gonna go get the comments that I wanted to talk to y'all about actually. Because in the sense like, it's a general mood of kind of these online spaces that it's impossible to capture. Yeah. That I think that, hopefully we're continuing to create new paths for the people after.
Totally.
But yeah.
Yeah. How do you measure vibes?
How do you measure? Kimmy, I'm sorry. Kimmy's watching the Zoom. This is like a question I think about all the time. Like, how do you measure? How do you quantify what's violent? Like, when does it cross over? Like, how many comments is too many? Which word becomes violent? Exactly. Like, versus like, the intention or something like that. So, yeah. Yeah. Did anyone have questions in the audience?
Yeah.
First, thank you very much for this. I was very excited when I saw the announcement for it. One of the first things you mentioned was harm reduction and asking permission before you use people's tweets or things like that. Because I work specifically on Black women writing fan fiction and Black women's fandom participation more generally, that's something I'm not sure, like I never have a definitive answer on it, it's always changing. So my question to you is, how do you, when it comes to like using people's tweets or things like that, how do you balance privacy, your own personal safety, and not censoring the entire truth, for lack of a better word, when it comes to more harmful tweets, such as like, things that are racist or sexist? How do you determine what names you keep in, what names you take out? Who do you ask for permission? Who do you refrain from asking for permission because you know they're going to say no because they said something racist? If that sort of makes
it does make sense. Yeah. So I'll say for Misogynoir Transformed, that I talk about a hashtag called Ruin a Black Girls Monday. And this hashtag was created by a Twitter user who didn't have a lot of followers. So generally when people don't have a lot of followers, I have a protocol that I want to make sure, but I'm like, it's a public tweet, and so I want to check in, right? But it's not to censor yourself or keep from talking about what happened. So I did reach out to the person, they didn't respond. It felt important to me to include the handle. Ultimately, that I think the person maybe stopped using the account. So even before the book, even before I was writing about it, the handle was inactive. So I didn't feel the same sort of pressure that there was going to be some blowback in the same way. So harm reduction to me is about kind of measuring what could happen to somebody by you including their handle. Like, what are the possible outcomes? And for corporations, for people who have a blue check, you know, the kind of immediate fallout that they're going to have from an academic book that's published by an academic press that's mostly going to be taught on college classrooms is limited. But when we think about perhaps a young Black girl who's writing fan fiction, maybe, like, is that handle something that is going to lead to an exposure that could be damaging, right? Are there ways that they could be identified? And I think that's a question that is a case-by-case basis. I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all, and it's different for each project too. And so what I would say is that harm reduction takes more time, and sometimes it requires being thoughtful in ways that the IRB might not flag for you. I think it has to be a conversation with the people that you're working with. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, taking a page from some of our other scholars that do things like using pseudonyms or aggregating comments so that it's not coming from one person, it's coming from a collective of people. I think those practices can help make the work that you need to share visible. Yeah.
And I I'm in the shade room, I was like, these people, I'm looking at the comments that have like 6,000 likes, even if they're like the worst comments, right? So I was kind of like, 6,000 people have liked this. This is a dissertation. It's gonna be embargoed for 2 years, and then this might never, you know, this person might change their handle on Instagram. It's pretty easy to do. So I was kind of like, you know, but when I'm talking about like other people, like Kayla Newman, the creator of the word fleek, Julia Davis. Why am I forgetting my girls' names? And their work, like, you know, they have all these interviews that I'm using their interviews they've already done. And in the time I'm waiting to hear back from them, if they ever come back to me, I'm like, the information that is out, I'm assuming you want it to be out in these interviews, which is why I use those. Which comes from my background, like a production studies approach within film and TV that, like, you know, you might not be able to talk to the director or the head writer, but you can talk to the craft service person and be like, was that actor really rude to you? And they're like, yeah, actually, you know, like you get all this other information from these different points to kind of triangulate on this one specific thing if you cannot actually talk to that one person.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nicole. I'm in Anna Berman Communication School. I'm a PhD student. I'm actually in the middle of writing my qualifying exams. I think it's like day 7 or 8. And one of my questions... One of my questions is really wild because they were like, using Black feminist literature argue for the legalization of sex work. I'm like, well, first of all, it's the decriminalization of sex work. And second, using Black feminist theories. So I use misogynoir as a concept to kind of argue, to argue for decriminalization. Is that something that you would perhaps be comfortable with? Like, yeah, I'm not asking you to speak to my question, but is that you know, I know like Audre Lorde was turning over her grave from some of the things that I wrote, but I'm curious if you think I'm making too much of a leap to suggest misogynoir as a concept to illuminate that.
Oh, no, not at all. I definitely feel like, yeah, part of what, I think one of the things that's so interesting about conversations with and around sex work is that we never get back to the people paying for services. And, you know, I was watching, there's a documentary on Pornhub that just came out, and a documentary on OnlyFans, and both of them focus on the content creators and the people in the videos, which I think is important. But for me, part of Misogynoir is asking us to look at who are the people who are causing the harm in a way. You know, like what is happening on the side of people who aren't paying for pornography, or people who are not consuming sex work in a way that is equitable and in line with what sex workers actually need. And that's never the conversation, because so often I feel like sex workers have to defend their right to make money. And yeah, I think misogynoir as a term is really looking at how Black women and people read as Black women are treated. And similarly, I think even as we're talking about decriminalization, that is definitely trying to get us to think about, okay, let's not talk about the people who are experiencing or could potentially be experiencing harm. Let's talk about the people who are causing this, right? Because it's always the sex workers who end up in the criminal justice system and not the people who are paying for services.
I actually have a follow-up question, but related to having coined a phrase that has taken off and that has such portability across so many different spheres, like misogynoir. You know, first of all, you know, when was the first time you noticed that the term had sort of been extracted from its use in this very specific context and, you know, I guess achieved its own portability, you know, and I guess, you know, circulation outside of, you know, maybe the kind of scholarly realm where it began.
Yeah.
And also, what are some of the most surprising things that you've seen, or maybe surprising applications of your term that you've seen in positive and negative ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I coined misogynoir in 2008, so it was in the dissertation, but I was still writing it. And then in 2010, I was writing for the Crown Feminist Collective, and I used it on the blog, and some of the other members started to use it, and then Trudy from Radiant Layer started to use it, and Trudy also started to theorize with it and started to expand and create conversations about her own experiences of misogynoir and how it was showing up. And we were in digital community together. And this again, I think, is connected to the book being written when it was. There was a certain time and a moment where Twitter was not so hugely populated that you could actually have conversations with people on Twitter, actually build relationships and rapport with people between blogs. And so that was a really important moment, I think. And interestingly, I think when it became misogynoir was a Wikipedia entry based on a class, a Barnard class project in a women's studies class, and so someone entered it for their class project. And so I think that's really when it took off in ways that I couldn't have anticipated. And that was sort of bringing it back to the academy, but I felt like it was sort of, out in the streets for a while. And then it came back to the academy, but I really think that it moved the way that it did because I wasn't an academic and because I was connected to these communities. I don't know that it would have moved the same way if I'd written the book first and misogynoir was understood as like an academic word that people didn't have access to. So that's one thing. And I would say one of the interesting ways that it's been used has been, I think it's global reach. I didn't think about it. I was very specific in terms of the research that I had access to, which was looking in an American context, but seeing that folks in other parts of the world found it really helpful has been impressive. I just did a talk last year I did a talk in Colombia virtually because people are dealing with a lot of misogynoir in terms of the Afro Colombian population there and how women are treated. And that was, I don't know, just really powerful to me that people see this application in their own context. And that, I think, is what's exciting, that the word has utility beyond anything that I thought about. That's one of the things that's helpful, even as it's really sort of depressing that people are using the word a lot and that it's, so, that it's used so much. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
As people said, thank you for being here. To start, I suppose, my question would be, like, what, you mentioned that you're, like, happy with the utility that people have gotten out of this term and how you're, like, surprised to see how it has, like, shifted. And I guess my question would be, like, what do you hope people get out of this? What kind of, like, prescriptive takes do you have based off of what you've been studying? How would you like to see this influence the digital or political landscape?
I'm really hopeful that we get to a place where, like, misogynoir is in some dictionary as some arcane word that no one uses anymore. Like, that's the ultimate goal. I think that one of the ways that it is useful is that naming a thing gives you power and attention for how to address it. So I appreciate it for that. It's been a real lightning rod for people to name something that they've been experiencing. And again, I feel like it's very much an extension of work that Black feminists have already been doing. So I definitely see it in a lineage of Black feminist thought and maybe just more precision with something that Black feminists have been talking about for, centuries. But I want to see people feel like this is helpful in moving the conversations beyond conversations into action. So now that we know what misogynoir looks like, we can actually work to transform it. And that's why I thought it was so important to talk about the work that people are already doing. So the videos, Tumblrs, the things that people are creating for themselves is such an important way to address this, like putting more into the culture that actually represents the world that we want and not just critiquing what exists.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess my question could be for both of you. You know, the internet and discourse on the internet is always changing and evolving. And my question is, when writing, did you or do you ever feel like you're writing against like a ticking clock, where you'll publish something when it's no longer relevant? Like, if that makes sense, like, because of the process of writing and editing and peer review, is that ever a concern of yours that once this is out in the world, the internet and the world has kind of moved on? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, like yes and no. Like when I was writing this and when we wrote #activism, it was very clear that we were capturing a moment in time. And it was already, because it's digital, it's already dated once you start writing. But I feel like it's still an important moment to capture. It's like a snapshot or a photo. It's not any less important because it happened. I think it's helpful to actually look at that. And it informs how we move forward. It's an important way of analyzing a moment, and that seems to me to be really important. And also, you never know when things are going to come up again. So I have a colleague whose work was on the marketing around the HPV vaccine, and instead of thinking about the language of vaccine hesitancy, she uses the language of suspicion, and how Black Caribbean parents were suspicious of the HPV vaccine. And her language around suspicion, I think, has been really helpful in thinking about people's responses to COVID. So there's also this sense of you never know how something is going to come back, because things, unfortunately, history repeats itself. So I would say it's always worth writing, even if you feel like you've missed a moment. It's not really missed, it's just sometimes the world will catch up again.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I think that was what a lot of people wanted, like in terms of your question about like how was it received. So I have a chapter that talks about Vine and TikTok, and I had to make it Vine and TikTok because there wasn't enough data, like numbers, facts for Vine, because it no longer exists as a navigatable app. And so like that changed the questions and the kind of way that I selected which videos to discuss, which was helpful because then I didn't have more argument in thinking about Black people specifically. So I was on Vine, like many people were, and I remember and see which Vines still circulate. So the question doesn't become like which very probably awesome, amazing, never before seen Vine that existed on the app that I never got access to, exists. It's like more importantly, which ones have made it out of the app and continue to circulate as a emotional vehicle for other people still. How are things referenced even without the video, just the text or the butt of the joke from a specific Vine? How does that still work? And that was helpful to push against what was really nascent discussion around TikTok, and to demonstrate how strange it was, how while there was a lot of nascent work on TikTok, there was so much compared to one or 5 to 10 articles on Vine. And that changes. I think a lot of the conversations, people now, I have my students doing a TikTok, it's due tomorrow, Thursday. And I was people were oh my God, what if they cancel TikTok? I was what if they cancel TikTok? I was we've seen this happen before, actually quite recently. And so it was really helpful to think about like this kind of like history repeats itself. Like the thing, TikTok may end, no, it won't. You know, like they will have afterlives that can never be stopped by people in government who don't even know what TikTok is. You know.
Thank you.
That was congressional session.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was really so wild. I was like, y'all didn't call not a single communications professor. Nobody. I'm like, so y'all don't know who Sophia is at least? I'm like, there are people who are known. I was like, this is something. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess, and if no one has any other questions, obviously you can come talk to us up here. But we're gonna end the official session for those on Zoom so that we can continue. Thank you again for everyone for being here. Thank you.